Welcome to the Conflict Whisperer, where we look beneath the surface of conflict to understand what is really happening, what is at stake, and what it takes to move forward. I'm Tisha Tyler, and today I want to talk about Target. Target recently removed a children's Halloween costume after people pointed out that its exaggerated grin, black gloves, small top hat, and overall presentation resembled racist blackface and minstrel show imagery. And if that were not troubling enough, the costume was modeled by a young black boy. Target apologized. The company acknowledged that the costume was offensive, said it should never have been sold, and promised to examine how it happened. But people are not letting Target move past this with a carefully worded apology. The reaction across social media has been swift, angry, and in some cases incredulous. People are asking, who looked at this and thought that was acceptable? Was there no one in the room who recognized what this looked like? And perhaps the most damaging response of all, Target keeps showing us who it is. That reaction matters. Because when people stop viewing an incident as a mistake and begin viewing it as evidence of who you are no longer dealing with a public relations problem. You are dealing with a trust problem. And this is not just a story about an offensive Halloween costume. This is a story about organizational conflict. A costume does not design itself. It does not approve itself. It does not photograph itself, select its own model, write its own product description, or place itself on the website of a major retailer. This product had to pass through multiple people, departments, decisions, and approval points before a customer ever saw it on the shelves. So the question is not simply, how did Target get this wrong? The more important question is, how did nobody stop it? Or perhaps someone did recognize the problem. Maybe someone raised a concern and their concern was ignored. Maybe someone noticed but decided it wasn't worth the professional risk of speaking up. Maybe the people with the cultural knowledge to identify the problem weren't even in the room. Or maybe they were in the room but did not have enough power to affect the decision. We don't know. Target has declined to publicly identify who designed the costume or explain the process through which it was approved. But that lack of information has left the public to fill in the blanks. And people are filling them in with Target's recent history. In 2025, Target scaled back several of its diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. That decision sparked boycotts, public protests, and significant anger among Black consumers who believe the company had abandoned its commitments that it had previously made. Now, this costume has arrived in the middle of that damaged relationship. One widely shared reaction asked in essence, you remove the people and practices associated with diversity. So who is left in the room to say this is wrong? Minneapolis business leader Shaletta Brundage raised that same question. She connected the costume controversy to the issue of who now has access to Target's decision-making rooms and who has the authority to stop a harmful decision from happening. Others have renewed calls to boycott the retailer. For some Black consumers, this costume is not being interpreted as a separate mistake. It's being placed alongside Target's retreat from its diversity commitments as part of a larger pattern. That distinction is critical. We cannot say Target's DEI rollback directly caused this costume to be approved. We do not have the evidence to make that claim. But the public is asking a fair and necessary question. Did Target weaken some of the perspectives, relationships, or internal safeguards that might have prevented a decision like this from happening in the first place? That's not merely a political question, it is a governance question. Who participates in the decisions? Whose knowledge is considered relevant? Who has permission to challenge the group? And what happens when that person speaks up? This is exactly why organizations need dissent. not performative disagreement, not a designated devil's advocate whose concerns can be acknowledged and then dismissed. Organizations need people who can interrupt a process and say, something is wrong here. Here is what you may not be seeing, and we should not move forward until we examine it. Too many leaders think conflict begins when someone raises an objection. It does not. The conflict already existed. The objection simply made it visible. When employees remain silent, leaders may interpret that silence as agreement, but silence can mean many things. It can mean fear. It can mean exhaustion. It can mean that previous concerns have been ignored. It can mean an employee has learned that the organization wants diverse faces, but not diverse judgment. And sometimes silence means the person who saw the problem have calculated correctly that the organization will punish the messenger before it corrects the decision. That's not an organizational harmony. That is suppressed conflict. And when conflict is suppressed internally, it often reappears externally. It appears as a social media firestorm, a boycott, a falling stock price, an apology, and thousands of people asking a question someone inside the organization should have asked months earlier. And this is also why representation alone is not enough. Diversity without influence is decoration. Simply having a Black employee somewhere in the process does not guarantee that employee has the authority, psychological safety, or institutional support to stop a bad decision from happening. A seat at the table is not the same as having a voice in the decision. And having a voice does not mean much if no one is there to listen. That is where the public backlash becomes instructive. The loudest reaction is not merely "this costume is offensive." It is, "we do not believe this would have happened if the right people had been heard and if they had been in the room." This is a devastating conclusion for any organization, and it cannot be repaired by communication alone. Target's apology was necessary. Removing the costume was necessary, but removing the product addresses the visible incident. It does not necessarily address the system that produced it. If Target wants to rebuild trust, it must examine the entire decision chain. Who designed the costume? Who selected it? Who reviewed the imagery? Who chose the model and the pose? Who approved the photographs? What concerns were raised? What expertise was present? And at every point where someone could have stopped the process, why didn't that happen? Accountability is not simply finding one employee to blame. In fact, rushing to identify one culprit can allow the organization to avoid the harder conversation. If multiple layers of review failed, then the problem is bigger than one person. It may be a problem with the culture. It may be a problem with power. It may be a problem with incentive. It may be a problem with who has access to decision makers and whose judgment those decision makers trust. The leadership lesson is this: the people willing to make you uncomfortable may be the people protecting your organization from a much more expensive and public conflict later. Leaders often say they want employees to speak up, but that invitation means very little if the organization rewards agreement, speed, and compliance while treating questions as resistance. Psychological safety is not proven when leaders ask, "Does anyone have any concerns?" It is proven by what happens after someone answers yes. Are they heard? Is the decision reconsidered? And are they included in what happens next? Or are they quietly labeled difficult, negative, too sensitive, or not a team player? Target says it is investigating how this happened. It should. But the real measure of accountability will not be whether the company can explain this one costume. It will be whether Target changes the conditions that allowed an entire chain of decisions to continue without an effective interruption. Because the problem was not only that Target sold an offensive costume, the problem was that somewhere between the first idea and the final sale, the organization either failed to recognize the danger, failed to hear the warning, or failed to give someone the power to stop it. And now the public is no longer asking Target only to remove a costume. People are asking whether Target can still be trusted. That is a conflict management problem every organization should be examining. Before your organization's next major decision, don't simply ask who approved this. Ask who had the power to challenge this. And then pay close attention to that answer. I'm Tisha Tyler, and this is the Conflict Whisperer. Because sometimes the conflict is not the people who speak up. Sometimes the conflict is everything that made speaking up necessary.